What if Stephen Curry had been traded instead of Monta Ellis to the Milwaukee Bucks in 2012? We know this would surely intensely change the layout of the league. We know that the Warriors would most likely not have won the 2015 championship and possibly not even made it to the playoffs in those two back-to-back seasons, let alone the finals. But how exactly would they be affected? Who would take Curry's place on the Warriors going forward? And likewise for the Bucks, could Curry eventually lead them to a championship instead? Or would he never get there, and would his legacy be completely different than it is now? Let's find out. So you might remember back in 2012 when the Warriors traded Monta Ellis for Andrew Bogut. This move was basically the turning point for Golden State, finally moving on from the exciting yet undersized guard tandem that was Curry and Ellis. The trade set off a chain reaction of other rebuilding changes made by the Warriors front office, eventually resulting in the construction of the team that won the 2015 NBA championship. Looking at the situation from the perspective of the Warriors in 2012, they were understandably desperate to add any sort of big man defensive presence in the lineup of a team that had been known for the longest time as the all-offense, no-defense team. They might have been entertaining to watch, particularly Monta Ellis, who was a fan favorite and whose trade actually had the new Warriors owner Joe Lacob booed vehemently by fans.
Sometimes change is inevitable and it's going to work out just fine.
Show a little bit of class. This is a man that I've spent some time talking to. He is going to change this franchise.
And they might have won a game or two here and there by way of purely outscoring their opponents. However, the new regime knew that a whole different direction or approach was necessary if they wanted to win. And Joe Lacob, he wanted to win. More than the average owner. Even in the dark days of the Warriors, Lacob had the audacity to do this.
If you look up there, that is a very lonely flag. We want another one.
He was willing to spend money from his own pocket and do what was necessary for the team to take their next step. Though this was a risk, it was a necessary risk, like most moves made under the new ownership. That was one of their philosophies. But now let's rewind. All the way back to before any of this had even begun, back to the Warriors in 2012 looking to send one of their guards out for a big man. According to multiple reports that came out at about that time, they just as willingly would have traded Curry for Andrew if the Bucks had asked. But the Bucks didn't. His health was too much of a question mark at the time. Instead, they wanted Monta Ellis, who didn't have as much future potential but had put together a few impressive scoring seasons for the Golden State Warriors, some of which as their top dog, and was a more reliable option at the time. Evidently, the Bucks didn't share in the Warriors' high-risk, high-reward philosophy. Lacob himself admitted that the Warriors were open to trading Curry or Ellis for Bogut, saying, quote, "I'm getting chills talking about Ellis now. He's one of my favorite players in the NBA. Anyone who thinks otherwise is crazy. I feel very strongly about him. It was incredibly difficult to trade him, but he's the piece it had to be to get Andrew Bogut. We would have traded either Curry or Ellis to take the next step for this franchise." Not only was Curry an option for the Bucks, but so was Klay Thompson. Before the 2011 NBA draft, the Bucks had considerable interest in the young shooting guard, but a draft selection by the Bucks at the 10th pick never transpired. Instead, they opted to trade their first rounder for Sean Livingston, who is ironically now a member of Golden State, and Steven Jackson, who was, even more ironically, part of the Bogut trade package to the Warriors for Monta Ellis. Then, Klay was selected obviously by Golden State with the 11th pick. Imagine if everything had happened ideally for Milwaukee. Klay Thompson would have went to Milwaukee at number 10, and they would have had both of the Splash Brothers on their roster. But I digress. After the trade went down, the rest of that first season didn't really change much at all. Curry and Bogut were both injured at the time, so neither could make an impact on their new teams. In the 2012 draft, however, things did get a little bit interesting.
With the 6th pick in the 2012 NBA Draft, the Golden State Warriors select Damian Lillard.
Warriors opt to take Dame as a point guard replacement for Curry, and fittingly so, as Lillard gets to go play in his hometown of Oakland. The Blazers then end up selecting Andre Drummond, and Harrison Barnes goes to Detroit. In this alternate reality, Orlando management is extra aggressive in building a competent team that would keep Dwight Howard satisfied. They're confident they can surround him with enough talent to prevent him from walking in free agency and don't end up trading him to LA right off the bat. Originally, Kyle Lowry was traded to Toronto. This time, Orlando sneaks in and steals him away from the Raptors by offering Houston a better deal. Since Iguodala was included in the Dwight deal that no longer exists, he's still being shopped on the market by Philadelphia. Houston is able to get a deal done and he goes to the Rockets instead of the Nuggets. Later, the Magic are able to orchestrate what will become one of their biggest trades in franchise history, acquiring Harden from OKC to pair up with Lowry in the backcourt. Later in the season, they get their final puzzle piece from Memphis and Rudy Gay, swooping in before Toronto can get a deal done. They've now built a real contender to compete with LeBron James and their in-state rival Miami Heat. Deron Williams doesn't re-sign with the losing Brooklyn team and instead goes to Houston, who, like always, still feel the need to make some type of splash. Brook Lopez stays in Brooklyn, however, as in typical Nets fashion, a shit ton of money is thrown his way to keep the restricted free agent.
We got a lot done.
The Magic go from losing Dwight Howard and being the worst team in the East to the number 2 seat behind the new core of Lowry, Harden, Gay, and Dwight. Steph Curry and the Bucks make no improvement yet as they're still struggling with a small backcourt of Curry and Jennings, similar to Curry and Ellis in Golden State. LeBron is still the MVP, Lillard is still Rookie of the Year, except this time with the Warriors. On to the 2013 playoffs. Milwaukee is swept in the first round by Miami, who move on to barely scrape their way into the NBA Finals. First, past the Pacers in a 7-game series in the second round instead of the third, and then in the conference finals, Harden and the Magic put up a fight but lose in 7 games as well. Miami still wins the 2013 championship in 7 games against the Spurs. Detroit, without Drummond, wins the lottery instead of Cleveland and drafts Oladipo, while Cleveland still takes horrible selection Anthony Bennett at the 2nd pick. And the Bucks' struggles are a blessing in disguise as they still draft Giannis, who will eventually become another superstar to play alongside Curry. Dwight's production is still beginning to rapidly decline, so Orlando panics and signs Paul Millsap, then turns around and flips Lowry in a sign and trade for Chris Paul, who, out of desire to get in on this new super team, declines to re-sign in LA. The Warriors let Monta Ellis walk to make room for a rising Klay Thompson. Ellis still signs in Dallas. The Milwaukee Bucks still trade Jennings for Middleton, and in doing so, give Curry the keys to the point guard position. The Clippers, without Chris Paul, hold on to Bledsoe instead of trading him to Phoenix. Iguodala, who originally went in a sign and trade to Golden State that offseason, also ends up in Orlando in a sign and trade for Rudy Gay, as the Rockets are still desperate to get anything in return. Magic GM will undoubtedly win Executive of the Year as loyal Orlando fans who didn't bandwagon onto Miami parade in the streets. The starting lineup is now unbelievably deep with CP3, Harden, Iguodala, Millsap, and Dwight. Kevin Durant is still the most valuable player, and Oladipo, with a huge green light in Detroit, wins Rookie of the Year instead of Michael Carter-Williams. Harden and Chris Paul end up toppling Miami's Big Three in the Eastern Finals in Game 7, then go on to beat San Antonio in 6 in the 2014 NBA Finals to win the championship. As normal, Wiggins is selected first and traded to Minnesota for Kevin Love. Detroit is the worst team in the East and ends up with a 2nd pick to draft Jabari Parker instead of Milwaukee. And the reason you didn't hear about the Bucks in the playoffs is that Curry suffered another season-ending ankle injury, which gives Milwaukee the 3rd pick in the draft, which means that the Bucks get their future center, Joel Embiid. But we all know how that ends up, and he spends the next 2 seasons on the bench due to injury. Houston's struggling without Harden, and they get the 4th pick, with which they select Aaron Gordon, who oddly enough originally went to the Magic, where Harden and Dwight are now. Julius Randle ends up in Brooklyn, and Zach LaVine goes to Memphis. Not many transactions to talk about this season, except that the Raptors finally find a new point guard instead of Lowry, as they bring in Isaiah Thomas from the Suns before Boston can snag him. He's to play next to DeRozan, which will make for quite an interesting backcourt. Curry wins his first MVP, having a breakout season in Milwaukee, and Wiggins, of course, is still the Rookie of the Year. One thing you'll notice to be a trend as things progress in this scenario is that Eastern teams are getting stronger and the conferences are finally beginning to balance out. Curry and Giannis are enough to lead Milwaukee past Orlando and to face the Cavs in the conference finals, but the Bucks are still unable to slip past King James. They fall to the Cavs in 7. win. Giannis is still young, Embiid injured, and they're not yet deep enough to beat a team featuring LeBron, Kyrie, and Love. Back in the Bay, however, the Warriors are still reaping the benefits of draftees Draymond Green and Klay Thompson, and of course, now Damian Lillard. These three, along with Bogut, managed to make it to the finals as the number 2 seed, however, cannot overtake Cleveland either. The Cavs are now the 2015 NBA champions. The Lakers had slipped under Minnesota in standings and ended up with the first overall pick, and you already know what that means.
With the first pick in the 2015 NBA draft, the Los Angeles Lakers select Karl Anthony Towns.
And so D'Angelo ends up going to the Wolves at number 2. Knicks get to draft 3rd rather than 4th and select Jahlil Okafor, which means Porzingis is still on the board. Knicks fans are happy and don't boo this time, but they really should if they knew how much of a stud Kristaps would become. Philadelphia is next at number 4 but takes Moutier, which means
the Houston Rockets select Kristaps Porzingis.
Now things start to get a little crazy. The Cavaliers let Love walk and replace him with LaMarcus Aldridge because they got Milwaukee breathing down their neck and they feel the need to improve against that threat. Love signs with the Bucks out of spite so that he can help crush the Cavs. You can already see a rivalry brewing here. The Bucks also need him as Embiid still suited up, watching from the sidelines. With Aldridge out of the picture, San Antonio signs Marcus Gasol to eventually take over when Tim Duncan's gone, a great move in their own right. Clippers are far worse without Chris Paul, and DeAndre Jordan decides to take a chance and a shit ton of cash in Houston. He joins rookie Porzingis there. With Dwight still on the decline, Millsap ends up leaving and signs up to play with John Wall and the Wizards. Milwaukee no longer needs Greg Monroe with Kevin Love now, so Brooklyn throws a bunch of money at him in another desperate attempt to stay relevant, and Brook Lopez still leaves the Nets for Portland. Curry goes back-to-back with MVPs even as a Buck, still putting up similar crazy numbers, and Karl Anthony Towns wins Rookie of the Year in LA. This time around, the Bucks are deeper and have developed more chemistry, and they move past Harden and Chris Paul's magic relatively easy. The Cavs were right to be worried, as a rapidly improving Giannis and 2-time MVP Steph are nothing to be trifled with. Milwaukee wins in 7, Love takes great joy in this, and they go on to win their first championship together, defeating the Spurs in the finals. Brooklyn was abysmal in the regular season, and they get first draft selection rights, taking, of course, Ben Simmons. Ingram ends up on the Wolves, who would have been an extremely athletic and scary young team if they still had Levine and Towns, and Denver drafts Chris Dunn.
Guess who's back again.
Yup. You guessed it, KD still wants to join up with his homie Steph Curry. He signs with the Bucks. Fans are still pissed, but not as pissed, since it's not the team he lost to this time. In return, OKC gets Love in a sign and trade, so they at least get something out of it. And now Milwaukee is built a lot like the current Golden State Warriors, with Curry at the helm, Middleton in a Klay-like 3-and-D role, KD, and then Giannis in a Draymond-like role. A point forward who can sometimes serve as a playmaker. The real terrifying part is that Embiid is now healthy, and this Bucks team is practically unbeatable on paper. But nonetheless, that's the current season, and this video is about the past, so what happens next is up for you guys to decide in the comments section down below. I hope you enjoyed. Please hit that like button and show me some love if you did. Subscribe if you're new, and click that little bell for notifications to stay up to date on the channel. This was a different kind of video for me, but one that I've been meaning to make for a long time now, so let me know what kind of what-if scenarios you want to see in the future, and share the video along to your friends. Klay on the mic, signing off.